Knights vs Vikings, Clash of Steel, the ultimate medieval showdown. In the shadowed centuries of medieval Europe, two distinct warrior cultures emerged, each forged in the fires of conflict and survival. To the north, across the cold, restless seas, the Vikings, master seafarers and raiders, prepared their longships for voyages that would shake the foundations of kingdoms. To the south and west, in lands ruled by kings and lords, a new breed of warrior was rising, the medieval knight, bound by fealty, armored in steel, and guided by the cross. This is not simply a tale of two types of fighters. It is the story of two entire worlds colliding. The Viking Age, from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century, saw monasteries burned, treasures plundered, and empires challenged. The Age of Chivalry, emerging from the chaos of the early Middle Ages, saw castles rise, mounted cavalry dominate, and the knight become a living symbol of power. Imagine the tension of an era where coastal towns trembled at the sight of dragon-headed ships, while inland peasants gazed in awe at mounted warriors clad in glistening mail. This was Europe's crucible, and at its heart stood the Viking and the knight. From childhood, Viking boys learned the twin arts of survival and war. In coastal villages where the salt wind stung their faces, they rowed longboats with their fathers, learned to read the currents, and sharpened their first blades. The Viking warrior ethos was built upon courage, reputation, and an unshakable belief in destiny. Strength and cunning were revered, but so too were loyalty and honor. Among them rose the berserkers, warriors who entered battle in a trance of fury, fighting with such ferocity that even allies trembled. Their belief in Valhalla, the great hall of Odin where fallen warriors feasted eternally, gave them a fearlessness unmatched in Europe. Death was not an end, but a doorway to eternal glory. This belief infused their raids, turning each strike into a stage for legendary deeds. With longships as extensions of their bodies, they struck swiftly, disappearing before kingdoms could mobilize defenses. Yet the Vikings were not mere raiders. They were traders, explorers, and settlers, spreading their culture from Newfoundland to Byzantium. This was the essence of the Viking warrior, a blend of seafarer, farmer, craftsman, and fighter, bound together by the pursuit of honor and renown. In contrast to the raw pragmatism of the Viking warrior stood the knight, a figure steeped in ritual, hierarchy, and faith. A knight's life began early, as a page in a noble household, learning manners, horsemanship, and the rudiments of arms. As a squire, he served a knight directly, honing his combat skills, polishing armor, and absorbing the unwritten laws of chivalry. By the time he received the accolade of knighthood, he was not merely a fighter, but a living embodiment of his lord's authority and his church's ideals. The knightly code emphasized loyalty to one's liege, defense of the helpless, and devotion to God. Yet behind the poetic veneer of chivalry lay the brutal reality of war. Knights were shock troops, the elite cavalry of Europe, charging with lances leveled, shattering enemy lines with sheer force. Their armor evolved into masterpieces of craftsmanship, balancing mobility and protection. But it was their discipline, their training, and their sense of duty that truly distinguished them. While Vikings struck like lightning, knights prepared like storms, gathering, planning, and striking with calculated might. Among the Vikings, weapons were both tools and treasures. The axe, their most iconic weapon, came in many forms, from broad-bladed bearded axes capable of hooking shields to massive two-handed Dane axes that could cleave through armor. Spears were even more common, prized for their reach and versatility. Every Viking carried a seax, a single-edged knife or short sword, as much for utility as for combat. Yet it was the sword, especially the rare and revered Ulfbert blades, that signaled true status. Forged with advanced crucible steel, these swords were deadly, flexible and enduring, far ahead of their time. Viking shields, round and painted, were as much offensive tools as defensive, forming walls or battering opponents at close quarters. These weapons reflected a culture of adaptability, where speed and cunning often triumphed over sheer mass. The Viking warrior entered battle not just to kill, but to intimidate, overwhelm and outthink his opponent. Where Vikings favored mobility and versatility, knights favored crushing impact and superior reach. The knight's lance, couched underarm during a charge, delivered devastating kinetic force capable of splintering shields and breaking formations. Once the lance shattered, the knight drew his sword, a broadsword or longsword designed for both slashing and thrusting. For close combat in the press of melee, maces and warhammers emerged, built to dent or crush mail and helmets. The kite shield offered expanded protection, shaped to guard a mounted warrior's leg, while also deflecting missiles. Crossbows and longbows, though not unique to knights, became integral to the combined arms tactics of medieval warfare. Each weapon spoke of a society organized for war on a massive scale, with blacksmiths, fletchers and armorers supporting a warrior elite. The knight's arsenal represented not just personal strength, but the resources of an entire feudal network. The clash between Viking and knight begins even before the first blow, in the way each defends himself. Vikings typically wore lighter armor, a mail shirt known as a byrnie over a thick wool or leather tunic, with a simple iron helmet and sometimes a nasal guard. This gave them agility, letting them leap from ships, run across uneven ground, and fight for hours without collapsing under heat or weight. Knights, in contrast, became living fortresses. In the early Middle Ages, they wore long mail hauberks and coifs. By the High Middle Ages, plate elements appeared, greaves, gauntlets, breastplates, until eventually a knight in full harness could turn aside arrows and sword cuts alike. But this protection came at a cost, speed and stamina. Yet knights trained to fight under these burdens, turning their armor into a second skin. The real question was always, could the Viking land a blow before the knight's discipline and armor overwhelmed him? For the Viking, the longship was more than transportation. It was the weapon that made their way of war possible. Sleek, shallow-drafted, capable of sailing up rivers and across open seas, these ships allowed sudden, unpredictable strikes deep into enemy territory. Crews could beach the vessel, raid and launch again within hours. In contrast, the knight's equivalent engine of power was the warhorse. Bred for strength and explosive bursts of speed, the destrier was a living missile, trained to charge through chaos and kick down foes. Horses allowed knights to cover ground quickly, concentrate force at a single point, and pursue retreating enemies. Each side's mobility system reflected its environment. Vikings mastered the waterways, knights ruled the land. Picture the battlefield. The Viking army forms a dense shield wall, row upon row of interlocked round shields bristling with spears, axes poised to strike at any gap. Behind them, fresh warriors wait to rotate forward. This formation was designed to absorb shock and then counter-attack in tight, disciplined strikes. Across the field, knights assemble in wedge formation. Trumpets blare, banners snap, hooves churn the earth. At the signal, the cavalry surges forward, lances leveled, momentum building like a tidal wave. This is Europe's tactical duel distilled to its essence, an immovable wall versus an unstoppable charge. Historically, both tactics worked, and both could fail. If the shield wall held, the cavalry might break apart. If the knights found a gap, they could roll up the enemy line. Understanding these tactics reveals not just who fought, but how entire societies planned for war. The battlefield was never neutral ground. Vikings thrived near coasts and rivers, where their ships could serve as floating bases. They preferred sudden strikes at towns, monasteries, and undefended settlements. Knights preferred open terrain, where cavalry could maneuver and charge effectively. But Europe's landscape was a patchwork of marshes, forests, and rolling hills. A battle fought at a river crossing might favor Vikings, who could retreat to their ships. A battle on an open field favored knights, whose heavy cavalry could wheel and crush. Even weather mattered. A rain-soaked field could slow a horse charge, while fog could hide an approaching longship. Each side's leaders had to read the terrain as carefully as a general reads an enemy's intent. While Vikings excelled at lightning raids, they sometimes laid sieges, as at Paris in 845 and 885, yet they rarely built large siege engines. Instead, they relied on surprise, intimidation, and negotiated tribute. Knights, living in a world of castles, became masters of siegecraft. They built and defended massive fortifications, employing trebuchets, battering rams, and mining to breach walls. This difference reflected each culture's resources and strategy. Vikings struck fast and vanished, knights built and held territory. When the two met at fortified towns, the outcome often depended on whether the attackers could draw the defenders into open combat before relief forces arrived. History records dozens of moments where Viking raiders tested the mettle of Europe's defenders. In 845, Ragnar Lodbrok sailed up the Seine and besieged Paris, forcing the Frankish king to pay ransom. In 885, a much larger Viking force again encircled Paris, only to be resisted by a fortified city and a determined garrison. These were the days when the seeds of the knightly class were being sown. Mounted warriors tasked with defending the realm, organized and paid to meet such threats. Each raid forced a countermeasure: stronger walls, better armed levies, and a gradual shift toward a feudal military system anchored by knights. Thus, Viking raids didn't just terrorize Europe, they forged it. Daily life shaped the warrior. Viking men were farmers, fishermen, and traders as well as fighters. They trained informally, practicing axe throws, sparring with wooden shields, rowing for endurance. Their bodies were hardened by work, their reflexes sharpened by constant travel and combat. Knights, by contrast, lived in a structured martial environment. As pages and squires, they drilled daily with sword and lance, cared for war horses, and learned the art of jousting. Their training grounds were fields of ritualized combat, tournaments where skill and prestige were tested. Both systems produced formidable fighters, but in different ways. The Viking forged by survival and versatility, the Knight by specialization and relentless discipline. Religion was a weapon of morale. Vikings invoked Odin, Thor, and Freya, carving runes and carrying amulets into battle. They believed their fate was woven by the Norns, and that a glorious death led to Valhalla. This belief made them fearless, almost reckless, and terrified their foes. Knights fought under the banner of the cross. Priests blessed their swords, mass was held before campaigns, and banners depicting saints fluttered above their ranks. They believed they were soldiers of God, defenders of the faith, and heirs to a sacred duty. These worldviews framed every decision on the battlefield, shaping courage, discipline, and even how they treated their dead. In both cultures, women played crucial roles. Norse sagas tell of shield maidens who fought beside men. But even when not on the battlefield, Viking women managed farms, oversaw trade, and held legal rights unusual for their time. They kept society functioning while men raided. In Europe, noble women managed estates, arranged alliances, and sometimes defended castles in their husband's absence. Women were the hidden backbone of these warrior societies, maintaining continuity and raising the next generation of fighters. This dimension of medieval life is often overlooked, but without it, neither knights nor Vikings could have sustained their way of war. Battle was as much about fear as force. Vikings painted their shields, wore animal skins, and roared war cries to unnerve their enemies. Berserkers foamed and howled, embodying chaos. Knights countered with spectacle of their own, polished armor flashing in sunlight, banners whipping in the wind, trumpet blasts echoing across fields. The clash of steel, the thunder of hooves, the beating of drums, all designed to seize the enemy's mind before their body. Understanding this psychological dimension explains why some battles were decided before swords even crossed. Imagine a duel at dawn. A Viking steps forward, his round shield scarred from many battles, a heavy axe in hand. Across from him, a knight lowers his visor, gripping a longsword. The Viking circles lightly, testing the knight's guard, aiming for gaps in the armor. The knight advances with measured steps, sword poised for thrusts and counters. The first exchange is a blur of steel. The Viking's axe smashes against the shield. The knight's sword glances off the rim. A feint, a counter, a shield bash. The Viking tries to hook the knight's knee. The knight riposts with a thrust to the shoulder. Who wins? It depends on terrain, fatigue, and luck. This duel embodies centuries of military evolution, raw aggression against disciplined technique, mobility against armor. Now scale that duel to an army. 500 Vikings form a dense shield wall along a riverbank. War horns sound, their longships anchored behind them. Across the plain, 500 knights form 3 cavalry wedges, banners of their lords fluttering. Arrows darken the sky as skirmishers trade volleys. Trumpets blare. The cavalry begins its charge, earth trembling under hooves. The Vikings brace their shields, spears angled upward. The collision is thunderous. Lances splinter, shields crack, men fall. The knights regroup for another charge, while Vikings counterattack in a ferocious push. The outcome could swing either way. If the knights break the wall, they roll up the line. If the Vikings hold, the knights lose momentum and are dragged into brutal hand-to-hand combat. This scenario captures the essence of their confrontation. No easy victory, only the hard arithmetic of courage, tactics, and fate. history did not stand still. Vikings became Normans, blending Norse ferocity with French feudal structures. These Normans, descendants of Vikings, would conquer England in 1066 under William the Conqueror, a Viking bloodline wielding the knightly system. Knights, meanwhile, evolved with heavier armor, refined tactics, and an enduring chivalric code. Both traditions left indelible marks on Europe's languages, laws, and myths. The clash between Viking and Knight was less an ending than a transformation, producing the medieval world as we know it. Centuries of legend have obscured the truth. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. Knights were not lumbering tin cans who couldn't stand if unhorsed. Both were highly skilled, disciplined fighters adapted to their environments. Popular culture often exaggerates differences or simplifies complexity. By peeling back these myths, we see the humanity of these warriors, their fears, ambitions, and ingenuity. Understanding them as they truly were deepens our appreciation of the past and makes their stories resonate today. Even 1,000 years later, the image of the Viking longship and the armored knight stirs something primal. They represent two ideals: freedom and conquest, ferocity and order, adventure and duty. In reality, both were complex, flawed, and profoundly human. Yet their clash lives on in books, films, and debates. Who would win, the Viking or the knight? This fascination is more than entertainment. It's a mirror of our own values: courage, innovation, and the struggle between different ways of life. As we close this journey, remember that history is not just dates and battles, but living stories. And few stories are as vivid as the clash of steel between Viking and Knight.